Welcome to Planet Poetry. My name's Peter Kenny.
And I'm Robin Houghton. And it's the first episode of 2024.
Yippee!
Are you up for another year, Peter? How are you feeling?
Another year at the Poetry Coalface. Yeah, I totally am, actually. In fact, you and I have already given a poetry reading this year, haven't we?
We have. In the lovely Lewis, the Needle Writers, last week. That was fun, wasn't it?
It was great fun. And, it's nice for us to read together as well.
It's nice to have your friends there. And we did have a lot of friends there, didn't we? So it was a lovely evening. And almost as huge as us reading at Needle Writers has been the T.S. Eliot Prize, hasn't it, in the last few days?
This year, the winner, as you probably know by now, was Jason Allen Payson, and his book was Self-Portrait as Othello. So we'll be dipping in there and looking at other bardic business a bit later on in the podcast.
But first, our special guest interview is with Tamar Yoseloff. And Peter, I think you conducted this interview, was it a month or so ago? Yeah,
it was at the end of last year. So you'll hear this stuff in the interview saying about next year, but actually that means this year.
Aha, great.
So I hope you enjoy it. Tamar Yoseloff's seventh collection, Belief Systems, is due from Nine Arches in June 2024. She is also the author of Formally, the inaugural chapbook from her publishing venture Hercules Editions, incorporating photographs by Vicky MacDonald and shortlisted for the Ted Hughes Award, and collaborative editions with the artists Linda Karshan and Charlotte Harker, respectively. She has run courses for galleries including the Hayward, the RA and the National Gallery, and co-curated the exhibition A Fine Day for Seeing at Southwark Park Galleries in 2021. From 2015 to 2023, she was a lecturer on the Poetry School, Newcastle University MA in Writing Poetry, and continues to teach on a freelance basis. She won a Chumley Award in 2023. Tamar Yoseloff, welcome to Planet Poetry.
Thank you, Peter. It's lovely to be here.
Just to set the scene, what have you been just doing, Tammy?
I've just had my COVID jab.
Are you still okay?
Still okay. I might zonk out later in the day, but I'm fine for the time being.
That's good. Now, for our listeners, I will slip occasionally into calling Tamar Yoseloff Tammy because I first met her some decades ago when she was a young Tammy Yoseloff that just zoomed over from, exotically enough, from New York. But do you prefer to be called Tamar these days?
No. Tammy is absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Tamar is for book covers.
Ah, right. Oh, that's good. We're going to focus on A Formula for Night, which was your new and selected poems. That was from 2015. And The Black Place, which was from 2019. Both these collections are from Seren. We might tempt people with an offering that was mentioned in the introduction, Belief Systems, which is due out next year. To kick off with a reading from A Formula for Night, Barnard Starr.
I always say Barnard, but that may be my North American pronunciation. Barnard Starr. The angels dancing on a pin's head, the UFO glittering in the night, the aura left after you have gone, all of them in my mind. That faint red dwarf that passes overhead when I'm boiling a kettle or making the bed is invisible to the naked eye, a ball of hydrogen and helium making for the sun over 80 miles a second, certain of its course. But I know it's there, just as I steer through a darkened room by trust, its familiar contours charted on my fingers.
That's a brilliant way to open the reading. And why I asked you to read that was I think there's something so characteristic about it. There's something in the darkness, a kind of invisible red dwarf star that the eye of the poem's kind of privately aware of, even though it's not seeable by others. Why is this idea of darkness, which frequently recurs in your poem, so interesting to you?
It's a good question, and it comes up quite a lot in my work. And I was once in a workshop with the great Sharon Olds, and she asked us to locate the most overused word in our poems. So I guess it's no surprise to discover that mine was dark.
Yeah.
I think it's partly because darkness suggests invisibility, and I'm very attracted to the unseen or hidden aspect of things.
Yeah.
And I don't think darkness is always pejorative. It can be protecting. And I like to think of Barnard's star as a comforting presence, known but not seen. And I don't know, I was Googling something else and came across the name Barnard's star, which is the second closest star to the sun. And I just liked the name of it. I just thought it had a great ring to it. So that's how the poem began. To me, it is a comforting presence to know it's there even if you can't see it. And of course, then the other side of that coin is that darkness sometimes is truly frightening.
Yeah.
And maybe we write to challenge these things that are unknown head on.
Yeah, I think there's certain poets that are kind of nocturnal poets in a way, and you're one of them. So I often think that Keats is as well, even though, you know, a lot of what he describes is during the daytime. But there's something of the night about Keats, which I absolutely love.
I like bringing Keats in, and I was thinking, of course, of his bright star.
Yeah.
So there's a sense of trying to find the light in the darkness.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a tragic poem, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. This poem of yours, Moths, also from your A Formula for Night. Could you read that as well?
Moths. We travel to the light instinctively. The diner is a beacon, sudden in the road like a UFO. As we enter, we are enveloped in heat, along with the coffee, the burger straight off the grill, as if the thick air outside isn't enough. We slide into a booth, our thighs sticking to vinyl. Our waitress is older than anyone I have ever seen. Her bones jut from her face as if her skeleton is trying to escape, rush into the night. I can see fields in her eyes, the land before houses and roads, Indian fires smoldering in the distance. She takes our order, does not look up once. A vein in her temple throbs as she grinds her teeth, scribbles fries, grilled cheese on her pad. The grilled cheese is orange, fluorescent under the humming blue bulb. It glues my lips shut. You are talking, dipping fries into a pool of ketchup. I can almost feel your lashes on my cheek, the warmth of your breath rising, your fingers dusty with work, old paint, a shimmer of my skin. We pay, go back into the night. The car picks up its tune of old motor and stuck gears where it left off. The radio zeroes in on a voice, a snatch of song, clear for a moment, then gone. The darkness is complete. Except for the moths, illuminated as they are caught fluttering towards the headlights. In the morning, you will wipe their powdery remains off the windscreen, then drive away.
I remember the first time I read A Formula for Night, which was a few years ago now. This is the poem that really kind of leapt out at me. It struck me as being more American, more explicitly American in tone than much of your work. How does being American or originating in America inform your work and who you are?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question, and it's one I often ask myself. I've been in this country now for 36 years, and although I don't sound it, I certainly feel more British than American. But in my first couple of books, there were quite a few poems which were set in America. And I think looking back on those poems, particularly Moths, I think I was trying to make sense of my homeland from what seemed to be a necessary distance, because I wrote most of those poems once I'd already settled in London. And after a while, I stopped writing poems set in America. I think the more I was here, the more I wanted to be present in this country. Although in my last book, there is a poem about growing up with the Vietnam War in the background and having that memory of the Vietnam War always being in the evening news. So I go back to it every now and then in almost a kind of nostalgic way, because I think the country I grew up in doesn't really exist anymore, that America of the 70s. And I feel the longer I'm away, the less I recognize America. It very much seems to me to be a foreign country, particularly in the current political climate. And I don't really know how America can recover from what's happening to it now in the, I was going to say in the post-Trump era, but Trump may not be over yet. And I find that aspect of being American terribly depressing. There may be more poems to come.
Yeah, I find American friends are often having to explain Trump, as if that somehow they voted for him or he belongs to them somehow, and it's...
Yeah, I'm not sure I can explain it, really. Although it's interesting, when I left America, it was the Reagan era and the Iran-Contra hearings were happening. And I remember thinking, as I was getting on the plane, that things were very depressing. And perhaps when I came back to America, whenever that was going to be, things would be better.
Yeah.
And then I just never went back.
I like the imagery at the end of all these powdery, broken remains of moths being swept off the windshield. In a way, that's leaving behind things you don't want to engage with, maybe, as well.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I hadn't thought of that, but it's a good thought.
Do you dream in a British accent now?
No, I don't think I do, actually. No, it's funny because I don't sound remotely British to anybody here, but if I go back to America, no one knows where I'm from.
Yeah.
And if I tell them I'm from New Jersey, they don't believe it because they don't think I have anything resembling an American accent.
So maybe we should move on to the poem The Formula for Night.
Yeah, I think that follows on very well from the Moths poem because it's also about, I think there's a kind of mystery in the Moths poem about the land as it was before it was inhabited.
Yes.
And this poem is occupying, in a way, this similar sort of territory about things, again, things unseen, very much the theme. The Formula for Night. It's getting late. Light floods the public bar. You're the final one to leave. The mirror's silver eye gives you back yourself, precise. You've lived your life through glass. You miss the brush of skin, someone whispering your name. You hear it now, a calling on the wind, insistent, a small but steady flame. You carry in your bones a gasp of summer heat, the formula for night. You arrive at the end of peer reveal, the heart-stop hour, when this world briefly yields to the next. A door that creaks an inch or two to catch a blinding beam. You want to understand what can't be seen, the fact behind the trick, the wires hidden from your view, the blue breath that powers the machine. Raise your eyes to read the stars. Streetlight's glare has cast them dark. Once bright bulbs, trembling elements crack and fizzle as they die. Their light is obsolete. But close your eyes, and still you find gold impressed beneath your lids, a moment lived. And when you open them again, darkness is what's left.
Yeah, again, this is so characteristic. But I love the thing of trying to find out the facts behind the trick of it all. There's a kind of scariness, a gothicness about your imagery here, but, you sort of bravely persist and see all these wonders, and then you're left with darkness again,
Yeah.
What is it you're looking for in all these poems? Is there a kind of... there seem to be experiments on yourself, locked in a room with darkness, trying to work something out.
I have no idea what I'm looking for. Perhaps it's the act of looking that's important. But I mean, this poem had a very particular origin because the image that it's based on is actually on the cover of A Formula for Night. And it's a piece of light sculpture, which is made from old-fashioned filament light fixtures, and the artist is Kerith Wynne Evans. And he was in turn inspired by a poem by the great American poet James Merrill, a famous poem of his called The Changing Light at Sandover, which is absolutely bonkers. Yeah. It's a 500-page epic, which is about Merrill's efforts to summon up various people using his Ouija board. God. And he sums up Auden, who's very grumpy, and tells him to go away, and Maya Deren, the experimental filmmaker. So all these characters come up from out of the dead to speak to Merrill. And this is the poem that influenced Kerith Wynne Evans in making this piece. So there's something quite attractive about that chain of reference from Merrill to Wynne Evans to me. Yeah. And the Wynne Evans sculpture was just exquisite. I was commissioned by the Hayward Gallery to write about it. And when it was installed in the Hayward, it would light up very slowly, and you could see the blue filaments in these old-fashioned bulbs just kind of crackling, and it would light up, and you could feel the heat, and then it would dim again, and then it would light up and dim and light up and dim. And I spent about 30 minutes just staring at it because it was so beautiful and so mesmerizing. So it's almost like you could kind of see the ghosts inside it. Yeah. And I think that's what attracted me. And that's why I think the poem, the eeriness of the poem comes from that experience, but also from reading Merrill and this idea of, literally the ghost in the machine.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah. You seem to me to be very much in dialogue with the visual arts, don't you?
Yes. And they're absolutely in dialogue, and always have been, because those are my two great loves, poetry and art. And the cross sections between them have always been very important to me. And I've always found that if I'm corresponding with a work of art or with a particular artist, that I end up having a dialogue with that work or with its creator. But it's also a way of internalizing. So, and possibly that's why I got away from the American poems, because they were very much about experience and memory. And when you write from visual art, you don't really know where it's going to take you, but it often takes you back into the internal, but in a way which is surprising and isn't about direct experience. It's a way of channeling something inside you, but through something completely external that you haven't made. And I think that there's something quite exciting about that.
Yeah. And usually visual art hasn't become words yet. And so, yeah, because sometimes I have a kind of suspicion when people are always responding to other people's poems and so on, it's just like, maybe respond to something else in the world, It goes down to how people think, I think. When I did my philosophy degree, a lot of people said that you can't actually think about anything meaningfully without putting it into words. And I find the act of writing is about translating pictures into words. I've already got the thought beforehand.
I think that's true. I feel that most of my poems start from image, even if it's not a work of art. It's just something I've seen.
Yeah.
Just something in the landscape or something that struck me looking out the window of a bus. So I almost always start from image. And it's interesting that is the thing that gets me going. And every now and then I start from other words. As you say, sometimes I lift something from another poet. But it's almost always image. So I guess that in that respect, it makes me a very visual person. I think metaphor for me is about putting together the seen with the unseen.
Actually, this passes the baton on to The Black Place. Many of the poems were informed by your diagnosis of kidney cancer.
Yeah.
I was immediately arrested by your quotes from Georgia O'Keeffe and Joan Mitchell. In both, there's an imposed distance from what they're describing, but they're looking out at something that becomes beautiful but's kind of far away.
The Joan Mitchell quote, I'll read it out. When I was sick, they moved me to a room with a window, and suddenly through the window I saw 2 fir trees in a park, and the grey sky, and the beautiful grey rain, and I was so happy. It had something to do with being alive. I just find that quote incredibly moving.
Yeah.
Joan Mitchell is possibly my favorite painter, if I had to say I had a favorite painter. And she was a terrific writer. She was actually the daughter of a poet. And her writing about her work is just stunning. Mm. And I think that was probably something she wrote in a letter to Barney Russet, who was her first husband and the editor of the Grove Press in America. And they had this tremendous correspondence. And so I think that quote comes from one of her letters to him. It also became very moving to me after I was recovering from my own illness, because I think it's just about finding joy in everything.
Yeah.
You know, even the gray sky and the gray rain, there's something joyful in the world. And I think it's nice to have her and O'Keeffe together at the front of the book, because in some ways I think Georgia O'Keeffe is the presiding spirit of the book. And they're very, very different painters. But I guess you could say if there's a similarity between them, it's that they both painted landscapes. And I think the difference is that O'Keeffe painted what she saw and Mitchell painted what she felt.
Yeah.
They were both extraordinary women. And so I wanted their voices, or at least a kind of description of what they did, to be up front in the book.
Could we hear Train at Night in the Desert?
Train at night in the desert. Charcoal dark, nothing to see but twin ghosts of your face in safety glass. The man opposite, upholstered in thick fibers of slumber. You're pulled by a faith in steel. The train is a lung breathing dust as it huffs to a black dot on the map. A bug stuck on its back, giggly legs flailing in air. Out there, the coyote keeps its secrets. It has its own line of action. It doesn't give a shit about your plans.
I just love that, how nature just gets on with it and doesn't care about you at all. This is strongly, this is the O'Keeffe thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I love that O'Keeffe drawing, because it's so, if you look at it, it's so minimal. It's just a puff of steam rising into a night sky, and the front of the train kind of moving forward like an arrow. And I wanted to write something which was just short and sharp that would do that image justice.
And you climb into that train in your poem.
Yeah, but again, I also just like the name of it, Train at Night in the Desert. It's just a beautifully poetic title.
Yeah, it is beautiful. This is sort of peak Yoseloff to me, nothing to see but twin ghosts of your face in safety glass, that kind of staring out into the black and seeing yourself.
Exactly. Yeah.
We talked briefly about the importance of visual art, but is the community of poets that are around you now important to you as well? Or do you orientate yourself towards visual artists, or are you reading your contemporaries avidly all the time as well?
Absolutely. I feel I'm very involved in the community of poets, and always have been. I've been organising readings, and I've been teaching for 30 years now. And I think that's a very valuable thing, because my students always introduce me to poets I've never heard of. They're better read than I am these days.
Oh, it's great to have a hive mind like that.
Well, exactly. Yeah. And I just think sometimes if I'm explaining something to them, I have to work out how I approach it or how I feel about it. So I find that work with other poets is always a way of trying to get me to explain what I'm doing, to find a kind of articulacy around writing. So it keeps me on my toes and makes me think very specifically about why I'm doing certain things in my poems. Why does the line break there? Or why have I used this image? So I think it's the kind of more you're working with other people, the more you're developing your own practice. And it's hugely important.
Could we read Little Black Dress?
Yeah. Little black dress. Too tight, too short. It weathered nights on the lash with my broken-spined Plath, my Bacardi and Coke, a classic LBD from Bendel's or Saks, sole owner deceased, her closet dispatched to the charity shop where we picked over Givenchy like vultures. My wardrobe belonged to the dead, Liz smoking in sharkskin, a boucle vest with leopard lapels that died for my sins, which were minor enough to dress for the part, Rachmaninoff oozing through speakers, the record skipping into dusk, and us, university girls with daddies and trusts, drunk and disorderly, dropping off bar stools one by one, until the time arrives for widow's weeds and weeping veils, Ray-Bans darkening the sun.
I find this weirdly terrifying, actually. It's kind of, there's all this kind of lovely lifestyle, but it all seems to be hurtling towards something really appalling.
No, it's totally autobiographical. I don't always admit to that, and I'm not always autobiographical in my poems, but that sure is. So I don't think of the poem as sinister at all.
That's good.
Because at that point I was thinking, the black place. What other sort of black things can I put into this book? What other blacknesses can I riff off of? And that phrase, "little black dress," just came to me one day. And so I had tremendous fun writing this. Maybe it's my slightly kind of morbid humor, but I don't see it as sinister at all. Yeah. I think it resonates with a lot of women, this poem. People come up to after readings, I think women of a certain age, women of my age, and say how much they enjoyed it. Women of a certain age, if we can say that. Maybe you hold on to your more reckless moments of youth once they've passed.
Yeah, this line about dropping off bar stools one by one.
Yeah, that is true. I really did drop off a bar stool once in New York, so I've put that in.
I think in the context of the other poems in this collection, though, I think I can be forgiven for seeing it almost like foreshadowing. I guess the contrast between that carefreeness and the darker material in here is... But it's a really good example of, a different tone of a poem on the same theme can really add to the variety of the read.
I'm always quite excited when people reviewed this book. A few of them did actually say that they thought I was quite a humorous poet. Yeah. And I will take that when someone says it.
Yes.
Because I don't want people to think I'm all doom and gloom.
No.
A fellow poet who I won't mention, he said this book was without consolation. I was quite upset when he said that. Oh. I actually like to think that there is quite a bit of consolation in this book. It's about what we survive.
Yeah. My takeaway, for what it's worth, is that it was actually very positive, not ungrueling, but positive. On that note, we should read Nephritic Sonnet.
Yes, you've picked one of the less positive ones there. Nephritic Sonnet. I wear an oxygen mustache, hating the cold creep of air into my lungs, but the nurse says I must keep breathing. I watch the slow clock of blood through the IV tube, my insides out on display, my fluid being, my wine of life. But why would I try to make a poem of this? I'm nothing more than a few sheets clipped to a board, my bodily functions monitored in words that doctors register above my head. There's no poetry in the hospital gown, worn thin from the rub of skin, or the urine stench, or how a person dies without elegy or dirge. On the other side, just a curtain between us.
Yeah, that was beautiful. The scariness of just a curtain between you and death is that's kind of the absolute nadir of this book in a way, isn't it? That kind of that horribleness of that. What I find interesting about this as well is that you're almost self-consciously, stripping off poetry. My wine of life, you write, inverted commas around wine of life, as if these kind of artifices have all got to be shed now. There's just a thin curtain between you and reality.
It's almost finding these poetic cliches about the body and just wanting to topple them.
Yeah.
I was attempting not to write poems about illness.
Yeah.
I just thought nobody wants to hear, there are enough hospital poems. I thought nobody wants to hear this. And then I couldn't help myself because, there's no way you can stop yourself from writing about these huge life experiences. So the poem is acknowledging that there was an impossibility of finding anything poetic in the hospital setting. But I've kind of changed my mind since I wrote that poem. That I now think of the hospital as a place where lives are saved, and that's and particularly what's happening to the NHS at the moment.
Yeah.
It seems completely miraculous in hindsight. But I think when you're going through that experience, it feels very grim. And so there's probably no way you can see that sense of redemption, because you're thrown up against other people and their stories in such an intimate way. That idea of just having a thin curtain between you and the person in the next bed, and all these different experiences and what people are going through. And it is a very intense thing.
Yes, definitely. The fact that you wrote it as a sonnet as well, that's a way of controlling it and putting it in a box in a way.
Well, yes, but it's a 13-line sonnet.
Yeah, so something's missing.
Maybe a bit, if you're superstitious, it's not a good thing.
Yeah. I remember Shakespeare talking about men of that kidney or something.
Yes.
And then I started looking it up, and, the biblical idea of it being the site of temperament, emotions, prudence, vigour and wisdom and all these kind of things. Did that have anything to do with your thinking in this?
Not at all, but it's a really good thought. I should have worked more on that. But yeah, no, it's all of that reference is there. But again, maybe if you're going through the experience, you're wanting to get through it and not seek metaphors for it. Yeah. But yeah, it's definitely a good thought. It's a missed opportunity, I feel.
Well, what you've given us is amazing, so that's great. Maybe we should move on to The Black Place, the poem.
The Black Place, after Georgia O'Keeffe. How simply she shows us a sweep of the brush, her thin wrist distilling the spring desert into shades of ruby and gold. Is there a black line defining the yellow, or is it just a trick of contrast? I see it in this real sky, this real ridge, the picture I make with my eyes, the here and now of sight. She called it the Black Place. Perhaps that's why I want to find that line, to clarify her phrase. She was in the desert, high noon, not a trace of cloud. She pulls my eye to a darker passage, a depression shadowed in broad light. When I look up to the sky in this real place where the sun fires my skin, I see a hill behind a hill, and then another and another. The place beyond our vision, the place inside the cave where the sun can never reach. It chills me just to think it into being. We'll never find it. As soon as we arrive, the distance shifts to somewhere else. We remain in foreground, everything moving around us, even when we're still. She found the bellow in a skull, the swagger in a flower. In turn, her lover made her wrist, her breast, his subject. They lived, exposed their lives to light, and now they're gone. The black place she made remains. She shows me how to find it, here, beyond the ridge.
Yeah, I love this poem. It does condense so much of what you're getting at in this book, doesn't it? Georgia O'Keeffe, she had all those paintings of the Black Place, didn't she?
Yes.
And you seem to be locating that as a place of safety in a way, that the black place she made remains. She shows me how to find it there beyond beyond the ridge. It's almost like you've hidden inside it somehow.
Yeah, it's interesting because ignorance can be a great thing sometimes when you're writing poems. I encountered this notion of O'Keeffe's Black Place during the Tate retrospective in 2016. I was looking at one of the paintings from this series and I thought, she's called it the Black Place and there's no black in it. And so I was thinking, well, she's using it as a metaphor. And so what does she mean by this concept of a black place if she's not representing it with a color? And it's interesting because going back to Joan Mitchell, she had a whole series of paintings called the Black paintings.
Right.
And some of them didn't have black in them. And for her, it was to do with a mood. It was to do with depression. And so I started to think about how you represent this kind of notion of black places in the world and in the mind and in the body. And just after I saw that show, I arrived in Spain. And I remember staring out at the landscape from the terrace where I was staying. It was Christopher North's house in Almacera, where there were many residential poetry workshops over the years. And so I was standing on the terrace there, and I was looking out over the hills, and I thought, oh, well, there's O'Keeffe's landscape. It's right in front of me. And then I started to think about distance and how if I were to walk out into the hills, I could see from the terrace, they would no longer be distant, but then the distance would be somewhere else. And then I started writing the poem. I started writing it while I was in Spain. And then only later did I look up Georgia O'Keeffe in The Black Place. And I discovered, going back to the quote at the beginning of the book, that it was her nickname for this place where she used to go and paint, which was the Bisti Badlands in Navajo country. And it was about 150 miles northwest of her home in Ghost Ranch. It was just her name for the place. Yeah. It wasn't necessarily a metaphor. If I'd known that when I'd written the poem would be very different. So I like the fact that sometimes you go away and do research on a poem, but I'm a great believer that maybe you should write in the Black Place and then work out what it is you're trying to say.
Yeah, post-rationalization is a great thing.
Exactly.
Tell us a little bit about Belief Systems, which is going to be released into the wild mid-next year, is that right? 2024?
Yeah, it's going to be coming out in June of 2024 from Nine Arches. The title poem is a long piece which was commissioned by Chris McCabe and Flat Time House in Peckham, which was the home of John Latham. And he was an extraordinary artist, and Belief System is actually a name that he used for a series of his works, where he did. It doesn't sound very good. He destroyed books, and it was about that kind of idea of the book as knowledge, but also sometimes something that leads us to the wrong conclusion. So he was working with this kind of idea of books and knowledge and how we respond to them. And I think of him as a very radical artist. So the whole book is about, I think, the faith and bravery of artists to make something new and meaningful, particularly now when the world is so terrible. And there's also a sequence in the book about the American artist Robert Rauschenberg. And that's a long sequence in the book. There are 12 poems. Which are based on Rauschenberg's Combine pieces. And these were works of art that he made from trash, basically things he found in the street or things he bought from junk shops. And so I wanted to read a poem from that sequence, which is about one of the Combines. And it was a Combine that Rauschenberg made for his lover at the time, the painter Jasper Johns. And they shared a studio together in the mid-50s. And while Rauschenberg was making his Combines, Jasper Johns was making his very famous paintings of the American flag, which were kind of heavily collaged. And it was a real criticism about America at the time. So this is Trophy 5, which is the name of the Rauschenberg piece for Jasper Johns. A picture is more like the real world when it's made out of the real world. So I can't paint your portrait, fix your face to canvas when you exist in endless motion like Duchamp's nude, descending the stairs in twos, all lean limbs, my heart the target you hit. I turn our bed on its side and call it art. I blaze a trail across your skin and claim my gift. Through the glass, the critics demand your public stance, the clean-cut white shirt deep South kid. But I'm the jester to your Jasper, the kidder to your straight man. You are the silence in the rowdy city of my mind. You dreamed of the stars and stripes, but your grab bag flag stands for this room, this minute, the state we inhabit, surrounded by all the things men break, which we make whole.
That's actually rather a beautiful love poem as well.
It is. They've had a really interesting piece by the art critic Jonathan Jones, which he wrote for Valentine's Day a couple of years ago, about the kind of extraordinary love triangle between Johns and Rauschenberg and Cy Twombly, who was Rauschenberg's lover before Jasper Johns. And he was saying that Johns and Rauschenberg were the greatest love story in American art, which I thought was rather wonderful.
Crikey, that's amazing. I wonder how much competition there is for that.
Yeah, I don't know. It was a kind of deep dive I took during lockdown, really. It was my lockdown project, writing those poems. And I got rather obsessed with Rauschenberg, and then the relationship between Rauschenberg and Johns. And also John Cage features in my new book as well, because Rauschenberg made sets for some of Merce Cunningham's ballets, and Merce Cunningham was Cage's lover. So all of these people figure in the book.
Yeah, all seem to be romantically involved with one another as well. Well, that's something really brilliant to look forward to next June. So, Tamar Yoseloff, thank you so much for joining us on Planet Poetry.
Thank you so much, Peter, for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
I like this idea of darkness as a comforting presence. It's not always something sinister.
Yeah, it's almost like something you can hide in.
I particularly liked the George O'Keeffe reference. I love George O'Keeffe's paintings.
Yeah.
This dark place, I looked it up. Apparently George O'Keeffe described this place as it looked like a herd of elephants. And that's just such a great way of describing this view of these rounded grey hills.
The black place. It's almost like that each poem has got a black background somehow, and the colours and things emerge from the darkness.
Yes, that's an interesting way of putting it. Even the black in the sense of something terrible, like the nephritic sonnet I was surprised by as well. I wear an oxygen moustache, hating the cold creep of air into my lungs. It's so vivid. And I liked that Tammy said she was interested in the shedding of artifice. And, I liked it, no one wants to read about somebody in hospital having dialysis or whatever. And yet we sort of do when it's like this, don't we?
Yeah. The way she describes it is so immediate, so stripped away of any poetry.
And so human, and just so it's about all of us, even though we've not endured this.
The way she talks about my wine of life, referring to blood, but she puts sort of inverted commas around it so that it's clear that poetic metaphor just seems so weak and unable to meet the reality of what's happening.
Yes. And the line, why would I try to make a poem of this? It's kind of self-referential in a witty way.
And also talks to just that impulse that poets have, whatever's happening to them. One day I'll make a poem out of this.
I know. And does that always happen? Sometimes, but yeah. When other people say to you, oh, I bet you get a poem out of this, won't you? We're like clocking them one, don't you? Mention the visual art. There's one thing that Tammy said, when you write from visual art, it's a way of channeling something inside you that's actually completely separate from the experience. I thought that was very intuitive.
What perhaps is interesting about how Tammy writes is this idea of having a conversation with something that's non-verbal. To me, that's really kind of interesting. It sort of accords with how I think about my own process.
Yeah, she said, didn't she? She almost always starts from an image, something that she's seen when she writes.
Something like Nephritic Sonnet, you can see the scene, but it's definitely built out of the real world. And it's a 13-line sonnet, but there's something quite solid, and the smells in there as well as kind of visual. I mean, she's predominantly a visual person, but...
Yes, and on the page it has this blocky look, doesn't it, as well? It's just this quite a solid look to it.
Her poem Little Black Dress, I love that. But it was that sort of giddiness of just nights out, slipping off bar stools and, living your best life in a way. There's this sense in which she's kind of careering towards something, She talks about Ray-Bans darkening the sun right at the end.
Yes.
And the way it appears in the collection, there's a lot of other dark places that are quite problematic. This is the fun part, and, something like the Nephritic sonnet is the kind of payoff in a way that things become very real.
in that little black dress, I started hearing so many rhymes inside the poem. The word black, immediately we had lash, plath, sax, dispatched. And then later on, it moves into the sounds like dusk, us, trusts, drunk, and it finishes on sun. And I really enjoyed that oral journey through the poem.
Yeah.
And there were other poems where either the internal rhymes or the rhythm jumped out at me in a really wonderful way. You know, not the one poem I wanted to mention was The Formula for Night, which, as she read it, you know, if I didn't have it in front of me, it felt like it was a beautiful sort of iambic pentameter all the way through. But in fact, when you see it on the page, it's a huge number of iambs, but there's very little pentameter. But it gives it this real elegiac kind of rhythm and pace. And I really enjoyed that.
I really liked the Moths poem, which was full of Americana, you know, in the desert, going to a diner and having a burger straight off the grill and
and
all
the
this
waitress.
kind of stuff.
Oh, that wonderful phrase, the waitress, her bones jut from her face as if her skeleton is trying to escape. That's brilliant.
There are many flashes of humour in this.
Absolutely, absolutely. And interesting as well that she talks about how the America she left no longer exists, and it's almost as if that's a sort of a metaphor for her previous American life, and this is all gone, basically. It's all kind of disintegrated or disintegrating.
Train at Night in the Desert, which was very much influenced by Georgia O'Keeffe. I thought this was a peak Yoseloff, where she says, charcoal dark, nothing to see but twin ghosts of your face in the safety glass. I don't know, there's something
yes
about that kind of reflection, but being on a train in the desert, it just seems so great, so exotic in a way.
With a coyote outside and all that kind of. It's not Sussex, is it?
No, it's not. And it was definitely inspired by that work of art. Sometimes I worry that poems written in response to another art form are kind of one more removed from reality, that you end up kind of what's real, what inspired it becomes really far away. But this feels really real as well.
It does, and it's not describing a work of art. I can very rarely warm to a poem that it literally just, you know, here's the painting and this is happening and that's happening.
That's
for me.
Ekphrastic poems are. I think that's some of those are
true.
Like this, aren't they?
Yeah, true ekphrasm. Ekphrasm? Is that the word? Ekphrastism? Ekphrasticism. It's got to be that, isn't it?
I quite like the ekphrasm. It's like when you really enjoy looking at a work of art.
It's a bit dodgy, isn't it?
I think we had something approaching an ekphrasm reading Tamar Yoseloff's work, and I'm so pleased that she came along.
Oh, me too. And you had a lovely rapport with her. I could tell that, you know, you knew each other from old, and that was really nice for the listener.
Yeah, she's lovely. I've been doing this thing, Robin, with some friends where you go round to each other's houses and you drink a certain amount of wine and eat lots of salty snacks, but you also read a Shakespeare play.
Amazing.
I do this with Mrs. Kenny and my friends Patrick and Adele, and we divvy up all the various characters and just sit there reading the whole play. And sometimes we did it with King Lear, and that lasted about, it seemed to go on forever, but it's probably about 4 hours.
God.
And that was really useful because we went off to see King Lear in the West End with Kenneth Branagh, and that production was cut to 2 hours. So it was quite a mysterious production in a way because you got all these people shouting at each other and giving each other good stabbings, but you couldn't quite work out why they were doing it because all the sort of backstories had been cut. But luckily, luckily we'd read the play earlier on. You actually feel like you've really achieved something. So last week we did it with Richard II. It's quite a cool play, actually. The whole thing about King Richard II was he was a very weak and indecisive king and gave up the throne without much of a struggle. one of the characters in it, John of Gaunt, he's got this very famous speech.
Oh, I know the one, yeah. Yeah, I don't know the whole speech, but it's the one with this sceptred isle, the one that always gets rolled out. Yeah.
I'm not going to read the whole speech, but it starts off, this royal throne of kings, this sceptred isle, this earth of majesty, the seat of Mars, this other Eden, demi-paradise, this fortress built by nature for herself against infection and the hand of war, this happy breed of men, this little world, this precious stone, set in the silver sea, and so on. And this is all about England and how fab it is. John of Gaunt is dying, and there's this rebellion against the king he thinks is a really bad idea, even though his son ends up being king. But it's that speech ends in, this land of such dear souls, this dear, dear land, dear for her reputation through the world, is now leased out. I die pronouncing it, like to a tenement or pelting farm. England, bound in with the triumphant sea, whose rocky shore beats back the envious siege of watery Neptune, is now bound in with shame, with inky blots and rotten parchment bonds. That England that was wont to conquer others hath made a shameful conquest of itself. Ah, would the scandal vanish with my life, how happy then were my ensuing death. So it's kind of, this thing you think of, this great patriotic speech that people sort of cherry pick from is kind of really damning England at the end, or the state of the nation. And I couldn't help my Brexit-attuned ears in this time where people are so divided to really tune into that bit,
It's made a shameful conquest of itself.
Yeah, it felt weirdly timely.
I mean, did it help you get into the play? Do you know what was going on?
Actually saying every word of the play or hearing it said, is a really good way of going about it. It's completely unabridged. But did you do Shakespeare play did you do English A-level?
He says in a confrontational fashion. Actually, I did. Can I remember a single text that I studied at A-level? I couldn't even tell you now. No idea.
We did Othello at my school, and I really loved the play at the time, principally because when I was reading it, sort of 17, 18, I was gripped by jealousy, and the kind of fatal flaw of Othello is that the green-eyed monster that doth mock the meat it feeds on, which is jealousy. And also, at the time, my girlfriend was from a Jamaican background, and all through A-level, we were going out together and meeting all kinds of resistance from families and friends and so on. So the racism and that at the heart of Othello really spoke to me as an immediate reality.
So Othello, is this a kind of a link into a recent big poetry prize announcement by any chance?
Yeah, this is one of our silky, fluid, effortless links, isn't it? Yeah, a couple of days ago, Jason Allen Payson won the T.S. Eliot Prize with Self-Portrait as Othello.
And he won the Forward Prize, didn't he? So that's a double. Yeah. How many poets do the double?
Was it a Poetry Book Society book?
That's right, it was.
So it came through last year, and I zipped through a bit of it and thought that looks kind of interesting, and I'll read it at some point in the future. And that point in the future turned out to be yesterday.
I think a lot of us reached for it who had it on the shelf and thought, better have a look at that again, and that's won the prize.
I must admit, when I returned to it, I thought, wow, actually, my impression of it was nowhere near as good as, the actual sitting down and reading of it. Othello is a really interesting character of, he's this amazing general working from Venice, has been hired by the Venetians, and he's married to this younger woman called Desdemona. They call him the noble Moor, but he's got this terrible sidekick called Iago. There's this idea of motiveless malignity. This Iago has really got it in for Othello, his boss. He was passed over for promotion, but a lot of the language Iago uses is weirdly sexualized and racialized, and maybe that's the reason for his kind of hatred and undermining. Iago sets up a series of events that make Othello really believe that his Desdemona is being unfaithful to him. Whenever he talks about their relationship, it's like a black ram is tupping a white ewe and making the beast with two backs, and really unpleasant way of talking about their relationship. This book, Self-Portrait as Othello, and you have Jason Allen Payson, who's originally, I think, from Jamaica, is a sort of really excellent academic and speaks lots of languages and has lived in Europe, in France, and lived in lots of different places. You know, he's a person of immense sophistication, but he's still kind of, if you read through this book, meeting sort of microaggressions and is constantly forced to consider his position as a black man in Europe and in European cities and how that works out. For my money, this book is a lot more interesting than perhaps some of the more recent winners of the T.S. Eliot Award. I think there's a lot of depth to it. It's kind of linguistically very rich. And, you know, I often say I'll return to a book, but I really believe that this is a book that will repay frequent revisits. I'm
interested to hear you say that. And I was a bit worried that I would need to know the play to be able to really appreciate the book. And there's no doubt there's a lot of allusions that enrich it if you're aware what they are. But actually, you don't need to really be a student of Shakespeare to appreciate a lot of what's in this book, do you? And there's a lot of autobiographical material. Self-Portrait as Othello is almost the sort of central sequence, and there are some very moving poems about the poet's mother and returning to Jamaica, and all in all I found it a very beautiful read and very thought-provoking. It made me want to go back to Othello. I noticed in Jason's book, one of the key themes picked out is the physicality of his body, you know, the fact that people, the racist gaze, if you like, and like you quoted that quote from the play of the ram and the ewe, and it's true, isn't it, that there's a lot of physical references to animals, and
because that's one of the more unpleasant aspects of what Iago does, and Jason seems to be pointing to that sense of unease about, you know, being a strong black man in Europe. You know, is a kind of, he experiences that people are feeling uneasy or a bit weird about it. So we'll read a poem from the book. Actually, it's a bit of a long poem, so we're going to share the reading.
So we're going to read Place de la Nation, which Jason dedicates to Armand Arbery, who was the 25-year-old black man murdered in Georgia in 2020. I'm sure you remember, in a racially motivated hate crime. His only crime was that he was simply out jogging. You leave the house and head to the gym. You ride the metro. You listen to some music. You read a novel. Try to act cool, like you belong here. You're so French. You travel in the underground, going from side to side of the city. The darkness helps, the white noise in a crowd. The crowd must be thick, or you will see your body raising suspicions by walking. You do not want that. But then you get to another part of the city and re-emerge, and you're hit with images again of yourself in the space. And yourself is two beautiful dark-skinned children just innocently sitting on a bench, waiting, not bothering anyone, just waiting, and you want to weep because they are so beautiful. And nobody should be wrong to be so beautiful in this world. And that beauty lies there, knowing that one day it will lift itself from their bodies like a question. You mourn the future loss of this being, so full in space, so occupying, so sitting before you on the bench. You re-emerge into this life, raising suspicions again.
They're from Mauritania, they say, brother and sister. They sit there on a park bench along the busy way and look at me with doe eyes, a look of discovery, in the fine grain of skin, the perfect lines of teeth, the stillness, as if no language had yet been made, as if the first day on earth. They look into this world, deciding whether to enter. Nobody should be wrong to be so beautiful in this world. And he's running right now. There he goes, right now. So you try not to act too muscular, not to look too big. Muscular looks very threatening in your skin. You want to walk hard, jog hard, be hard. But today you think about your mother. You owe it to her to protect her from this. What you can do, what can be done to you. You've just come out of the gym. You feel fit, you feel strong, you feel large and full of blood. But you small up yourself and keep going. You read endless messages about your body. You're consuming your body. All the images fill you. And he's running right now. There he goes, right now.
Oh,
interesting poem, isn't it?
Very interesting, yeah. I mean, it's strong stuff. Really, it gives you shivers. Really, I think there is some fab stuff in here.
A just winner.
Yeah,
excellent.
We don't have the green-eyed monster about other people winning all the prizes, though, do we?
No, we're absolutely not. We're Buddhist. We look at our own projects and carry on.
Well, and I should just say, when I looked at my Shakespeare to check up on Othello, I did get out the complete works of William Shakespeare, 1976 edition, and it says here that I won it as a prize for general attainment in the fourth form.
General attainment.
Prendergast Grammar School. General, yeah. I think that was the fourth form. I think that was the same year I got my 100 metres backstroke, actually, so it was a pretty good year, I have to say.
What's general attainment?
General. It means that they can't put their finger in anything, but she did all right, though.
Well, that was that marvellous backstroke
Nothing
business.
Nothing specific.